I woke up with the taste of dust in my mouth and leather under my fingernails. It didn't make sense because I don't work with leather. I work in an office, staring at spreadsheets, my hands soft and clean. But that morning, in Cusco, in 1983, I woke up choking on the scent of tanned hide as if I'd been stitching shoes all night in a cramped, windowless shop. At first, I thought maybe it was just the smell of the streets. Cusco is full of markets and stalls, the scent of food and raw materials tangling together. But this was sharper, darker, like burnt hide and iron nails. It was lodged in my throat like something remembered instead of smelled. I didn't tell anyone. Not my landlady, not the couple of travelers I had chatted with in the hostel common room the night before. But when I went out that day, the streets weren't just streets anymore. They unfolded like memories. I walked without thinking, my legs pulling me along alleys I hadn't seen before, my head tilting as though listening to instructions whispered, under the noise of traffic. And when I stopped, I was standing in front of a shuttered shop with faded paint across the wood. Zapateria Flores. My chest clenched. I couldn't breathe, my knees nearly gave. I had never been here in my life, but I knew it. The cracks in the wood, the tilt of the doorway, the tiny bell that must have once rung above the entrance. I reached for the lock before realizing the place had been closed for years. I don't know how long I stood there, staring, palms sweating. Long enough for an old man across the street to notice. He watched me, narrowed eyes under a weathered hat. When I finally pulled myself away, he shuffled over. "You know this place?" he asked in Spanish. I stammered, "I know. Just looking." He spat on the ground. "Nothing to see. The man who worked here? Bad business. Better to forget." But I couldn't forget. That night I dreamed. I wasn't me anymore. I was bent over a bench, hammering nails into solace. My hands blistered and black with glue. I felt every strike, the dull ache in my back, the sweat in my hair. And then I felt the fear. Heavy boots pounding up the street. A knock. A voice I knew was dangerous. I tried to brace the door with my shoulder, but it splintered. Rough hands grabbed me, pressed me against the wall. "You talk too much," one of them hissed. And then pain. Blinding, final pain in my chest, like a spike driven straight through. I woke up screaming. The sheets twisted around me like bindings. I told myself it was just a nightmare. Travel, strange food, new environment. But the next morning, my shirt clung damp with sweat, and my chest throbbed where the dream had pierced me. I didn't want to go back to the shop, but something dragged me there anyway. In daylight, it looked ordinary, just another closed storefront. But when I pressed my palm to the wall, I felt heat, faint vibrations, as if machines were still running inside. A voice behind me startled me. "You shouldn't touch that place." It was the old man again. He leaned on his cane, eyes hard. "People say he died because he spoke of things not meant to be spoken." I swallowed. "Smuggling?" The old man tilted his head slowly, studying me. "Who told you that?" I didn't know. The words had just slipped out, like something I had always known. He muttered, "Yes, shoes with hollow solace compartments. In walls. They moved goods, drugs, whatever fit," he found out. He thought honesty would save him. The man's lips curled. It didn't. My skin prickled. I turned away, but as I walked, I swore I heard the clink of nails in a tin and the scrape of leather on wood following behind me. That night, the dream came again, sharper. I was sewing a seam when I heard a whisper behind me. "They will come." I turned, but no one was there. Still, I knew. My death wasn't an accident. It was punishment. And when the knife went in, it wasn't just a body dying, it was me. Couldn't sleep after that. I sat up shaking, staring at my hands. They weren't blistered, not really, but in the moonlight, I swore I saw calluses, cuts that weren't mine. I flexed my fingers and smelled glue and blood. I thought about leaving Cusco, but something anchored me. I couldn't explain it. Every street turned me back toward that shop, and every time I passed it, I felt the same pulse in my chest, the same whisper. Look inside. So I did. I found the landlord, a weary woman who barely remembered the last tenant. With a few solace slipped her way, she gave me the key. The door groaned as I pushed it open. The smell hit me instantly, stale leather, dust, something metallic beneath. The light cut through the room, showing cracked benches, broken tools, nails scattered like forgotten teeth. I stepped inside, and the air thickened. It wasn't just a shop anymore, it was my shop. I knew where everything had once been, the jars of dye, the hammer hooks, the small box of thread I had hidden in the corner. My heart hammered as I knelt by the wall. My fingers brushed the plaster until they found a seam. I pressed. The panel shifted. Behind it, a cavity stretched between studs. Empty now, but I knew I knew it had once been stuffed with contraband. The men who killed me had used my own walls. The sound of footsteps froze me, not from outside, from deeper in the shop. I straightened, every muscle taut. Hello, nothing. Just the creak of floorboards. Then a whisper, so soft I thought it was in my head. You shouldn't have come back. I staggered out, slamming the door behind me, chest aching like a fresh wound. For days, I tried to avoid it. I wandered Cusco's markets, tried to lose myself among tourists and vendors, but the memories stalked me. Every shoe I saw for sale, every hammering sound, dragged me back. I couldn't escape. One night, desperate, I bought a bottle of Pisco and drank until the world blurred, but that made it worse. The dreams came violent, relentless. I relived the murder again and again, each detail sharper. The knife, the blood pooling on the floorboards, the men laughing as they left me gasping. And the worst part, the knowledge that no one had ever cared, no justice. Just silence when I woke. My pillow was wet with tears I didn't remember shedding. My chest burned like fire. And then I realized I wasn't crying alone. A voice was whispering in my ear, in Quechua words I half understood. Finish it. I had no choice. The memories weren't just memories. They were demands. I went back to the shop in daylight, hands trembling, and forced the panel open again. This time, I searched deeper, pressing along every inch of the wall. At last, I found it a second compartment, hidden behind the first. Inside, a rusted tin box. I pried it open. Inside were papers, brittle with age, lists, names, numbers. A record of smuggling, shipments, bribes, proof, my proof. His proof. My blood iced over. Whoever had killed me. They hadn't just silenced a shoemaker. They had silenced the evidence that could have ruined them, and now I held it in my hands. That night I didn't dream. I remembered. Full, clear, unstoppable. My name was not mine anymore. My life was not mine anymore. I felt his heartbeat, his fear, his final gasping breath. And then I heard the door crash open. The same boots, the same hissed warning. Too much talking. Only this time they weren't in the past. They were here. I shot awake, heart pounding. Someone was outside my room, a shadow under the door. The knob turned slowly. I scrambled up, clutching the tin box like a shield. The door creaked, then stopped. Silence. When I dared to open it, the hallway was empty. I left Cusco the next day, but the memories didn't leave me. On the bus, every time I closed my eyes, I felt the knife again. At every stop, I looked for men in boots. Even now, years later, the box sits locked away. But I know it's not enough, because the story didn't end in 1983. It began again in M. And when I walk past a shoe store or smell leather and glue, I swear I hear him whisper, "We are not finished." Story number 2. I was standing by the river when it first happened. Not a special night, not an anniversary, just me trying to clear my head after another argument with my mother about who I was and wasn't. I'd lived in Ljubljana all my life, but I swear I never once noticed that broken slab of stone pressed half into the riverbank mud. I wouldn't have cared either, except the moment I saw it. I froze, my throat closed. My chest squeezed like someone had just shoved me underwater. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't look away from it. It was like my body remembered something my mind didn't. I stumbled closer, half in shock, kneeling until my fingers touched the damp, rough edge of the stone. And that's when I heard it. Not out loud, not in the air inside my head, echoing. They drowned me here. I pulled my hand back like I'd burned it. My first thought was, Jesus, I'm losing it. Stress, hormones, insomnia, pick one. But the words wouldn't leave. They weren't my words. They came with a flood of panic so real I could taste river water in my mouth, bitter and silty. I swear I even coughed like I'd inhaled it. I stumbled back and sat in the dirt, shaking, staring at that stone. It had no markings, nothing to even suggest it was a memorial, just a chunk of carved granite eroded nearly flat. But it was deliberate. Someone put it there. Someone forgot it. And I knew that it had been meant for a woman. I didn't tell anyone at first. How do you tell someone? I touched a rock and heard a dead woman's last words. But it didn't stop. The nightmares started that same week. I'd go to bed and wake up thrashing, lungs burning, river water filling my mouth. Every single time. I wasn't me, I was her. I saw through her eyes. I wore her clothes, her shoes, her body. I was dragged by rough hands, men shouting words I didn't understand but somehow felt. Hatred so thick it hummed in my bones. I'd fight, scream, kick, but they laughed. They tied rocks to my ankles. And then the fall, the cold, the black. Always the black dot. It wasn't just dreams though. In daylight, things slipped through. Smells that didn't belong. Old perfume, sharp like violets gone bad. Leather gloves brushing against my arm when no one was near. Once, walking past the market, I smelled smoke and heard horses' hooves on cobblestone, even though there were only cars around me. I started avoiding people because I'd flinch at voices, thinking I heard their laughter. The men from the river dot. By the second month, I couldn't ignore it. I started digging, literally and figuratively. City archives, library records, anything about disappearances by the river. Everyone told me Ljubljana's history was complicated. Records lost in wars, floods, fires. But I found something. A small police report from 1911, barely a page long, about a missing woman named Anna Drobnik, 25 years old, last seen, walking home from a tailoring shop where she worked, never found. Case closed without answers. Anna. The name hit me like a blow. I said it out loud in my apartment, alone, and felt my skin prickle, as if someone else inside me was answering. I cried for hours, and I couldn't explain why. I told my best friend, Luca, because keeping it in was breaking me. We sat in his kitchen, me trembling over a mug of tea I didn't drink, spilling everything: the stone, the voice, the nightmares, the file I found. He didn't laugh. He didn't call me crazy. He just frowned, rubbed his jaw, and said, "So you think you were her, in another life?" I whispered yes. Saying it felt like confessing a crime. He thought for a long time, and then said, "Then, maybe she wants you to find out what happened. Maybe she won't stop until you do." That night, for the first time, I dreamed something different. Not the drowning itself, but the walk before. I saw Anna's shoes scuffing along the river path. I saw the men waiting. I saw the stone already half buried by reeds. She knew. She was already afraid. I woke up gasping, and instead of fear, I felt fury. If they had killed her for who she was, for daring to exist outside their rules, then I wanted them named. I wanted someone, even 100 years later, to know. I started visiting the stone daily. I'd sit beside it like it was a grave, speaking to her in whispers, telling her I believed her, that I wouldn't let her be forgotten. And the strangest thing happened. The nightmares softened. Still terrifying, but not as sharp, like she trusted me now. Then came the night Luca insisted on coming with me. He didn't like that I went alone. So we went together, carrying a flashlight, crunching over frost. I showed him the stone, pressed my palm to it. Nothing happened at first. He looked skeptical, but then he touched it too, and he went pale. His breath caught, his body stiffened. He yanked his hand back, swore loudly, "Jesus Christ." I felt, I don't know, like my chest collapsed. I whispered, drowning. He didn't argue anymore. We kept searching, him by my side now. Old maps, parish records. We found references to the scandal of the tailor's daughter, whispered accounts that Anna had dressed like a man, that she had brought shame, always euphemisms, but the meaning was clear enough. She had lived outside their rules, and for that, she had died. The last piece came by accident. Luca's cousin worked construction near the river and dug up old wooden beams half-rotted. From what might have been a dock, wedged between them was a rusted metal shackle. My heart stuttered when I saw it. The nightmares had shown me ropes, rocks tied to ankles, and here was the evidence. I thought finding it would free me, but instead, the nights grew worse again. Not dreams this time awake. I'd wake choking, my hair wet though my apartment was dry. Once, I found mud on my bedsheets. Luca started sleeping on my couch just to make sure I didn't hurt myself in my sleep. He said sometimes he'd hear me crying in a voice that wasn't mine. Higher, softer, her voice dotted built to the worst. Night of my life. We'd gone back to the stone, Luca and me, standing there in the freezing dark. I don't know why I just felt pulled, like if I didn't go, something terrible would happen anyway. I knelt, pressed my hand to the stone, whispered, "I know what they did. I see you." And then the world tilted. I wasn't beside the river anymore. I was in it. My body hit the freezing current, lungs exploding with pain. I saw their faces, above me, jeering, distorted by water. My arms thrashed, but the rocks dragged me down. My vision narrowed to black. I screamed, but only bubbles came out. But then I felt another hand, not theirs, gentle, pulling me upward, a woman's face. Beside mine, eyes wide, hair floating like weeds. She was me, and I was her, and she was saying without words, "Breathe." When I gasped awake, I was still kneeling at the river, Luca shaking me, shouting my name. My clothes were soaked, my lips blue. He swore I'd collapsed face first into the water even though he'd been holding me upright. I knew then it was finished, not because I was safe, but because she had shown me the whole truth. She didn't want me to die with her. She wanted me to live with her memory. We reported what we found to the local museum, the old records, the shackle, even the stone. They listened, politely, skeptically, but they took notes. I don't know if they'll ever mark it officially, but for me, it doesn't matter. I carved her name myself, with a chisel Luca borrowed, into that half-buried stone. Anna. The nightmares stopped after that. Not completely sometimes. I still feel the river on my skin when I close my eyes, but the drowning is gone. Now it's quieter. Sometimes I hear humming, like a song in the back of my head. Peaceful. I think she just wanted her story told. And I think, somehow, she chose me because I understood what it meant to be punished for living outside of what the world expects. Maybe in another life, I was her. Maybe I still am. But I'm not afraid of that anymore. So when people ask me why I sometimes go sit by the river for hours, I just smile and tell them I'm visiting a friend. Because that's what she is now. Not a ghost, not a nightmare. A friend who trusted me enough to share her death so she wouldn't have to be forgotten, and I'll never let her be forgotten again. Story number 3. I was 9 years old when I first told my mother that I used to die in a vineyard. I remember blurting it out as casually as if I were asking for bread with butter. But the look on her face wasn't casual at all. She froze, spoon, halfway to her mouth, and asked me to repeat it. I said it again, slowly, so she wouldn't think she'd misheard. I used to work in the vineyard. They killed me there. She dropped her spoon. The metal clanged against the enamel plate, and I knew then that I'd said something wrong, though I couldn't explain why it felt so right in my mouth, like a memory being rinsed clean. For weeks after that night, I had the same dream. I was barefoot in rows of vines that smelled of sweet rot, hands stained purple from grapes I never got to taste. Men shouted at me in a language I didn't fully understand then. Afrikaans words clipped, sharp like a whip crack. My chest tightened when I remembered how they grabbed me, how the rope bit into my skin, and how I could see the soil pressed against my cheek as the air was pulled out of me. I woke up choking, nails digging into my own throat. My father dismissed it as childish imagination, but my mother wasn't so sure. She kept asking me to draw what I saw, to tell her more about the land. I told her about a farmhouse with white walls and a red roof, about the stone well with moss climbing its sides, and about a crooked tree at the edge of the vines. She paled each time I described another detail. Finally, she asked my father if we could take a trip to Stellenbosch to visit her cousin. He grumbled but agreed. I didn't realize then that my mother wasn't taking me for a family visit. She was taking me back. When we arrived, I felt a pull in my chest, like a hook tugging me forward. I ran ahead on the dirt road until I reached the very tree I had described weeks before. I didn't have to search. My legs carried me with the certainty of someone who had walked that ground 100 times. I pointed, here. My mother's hand clamped down on my shoulder, trembling. The workers stared at me, a skinny boy in dusty sandals, declaring things I couldn't possibly know. One older man laughed nervously and said to my mother, "These kids, always stories." But then I crouched, touched the soil, and whispered words I hadn't known I remembered. "Dyskult is nu at betal nai." The debt is never paid. The old man's laughter died in his throat. He asked me how I knew that phrase. I shrugged. It had simply slipped from my mouth like breath. I insisted they dig. I don't know where the insistence came from, only that I could feel the earth vibrating beneath my knees, like it held something restless. At first no one wanted to, but my mother pleaded, and after an hour of muttering and resistance, a few men brought shovels. I remember the sound of the metal biting into the earth, the way each clump of soil seemed to echo inside my head. When the first piece of rusted iron surfaced, I felt my stomach twist. The men unearthed shackles, brittle with age, and then bones, curled awkwardly as if the body had not been laid to rest, but discarded like waste. The vineyard went silent. Even the birds seemed to pause. My mother held me against her, though my eyes never left the hole. I whispered, "That's me." My voice was calm, too calm for a boy my age. The men crossed themselves. One spat and walked away. For days afterward, I couldn't eat. Every bite of food turned to ash in my mouth. I felt guilty, like I'd betrayed someone by forcing them to bring that body back into the light. At night, I felt me hovering close. I knew his name without anyone telling. Me, Jacobus, a vineyard hand who had worked under a cruel foreman, beaten when he refused to leave his land after a dispute over wages. They had chained him, silenced him, and buried him like garbage. The police came, of course. They questioned my parents, asked how a child could know where to find a corpse buried decades ago. My father avoided their eyes, muttering about dreams and childish nonsense. But one of the officers, a stern man with gray hair, asked me to repeat the phrase I had said at the tree. When I did, his face drained of color. He told my parents that he had heard his grandfather mention those very words when speaking about a vineyard worker who had vanished. He said he'd been told never to repeat the story, that it was bad luck. After the body was taken away, things should have ended, but they didn't. I began to lose myself. At school, I called my teacher Boz, the word Jacobus had used for the foreman. At home, I picked fights with my father in a language he didn't understand, my tongue shaping words far older than me. My mother wept quietly at night, thinking I couldn't hear. One evening, she asked me directly, "Do you remember your death?" I nodded. The images flooded back, the struggle, the blows, the suffocating earth closing around me. I cried into her lap, shaking, whispering, "It wasn't fair. They promised me my wages." She rocked me, whispering prayers, though I could tell she was terrified. As weeks passed, the nightmares turned into waking visions. I would be playing marbles one moment, then suddenly I was back in the vineyard, rope burning my wrists, men's laughter ringing in my ears. I scratched at my skin until it bled, desperate to pull the invisible bindings off. Then came the night that still makes my skin crawl. I woke to the smell of wine, thick and sour. Standing at the foot of my bed was a figure, blurred, but with eyes like mine. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched. I couldn't scream. My throat closed tight. After what felt like hours, he raised his hand and pointed toward the door. When I finally found the strength to move, I stumbled out into the yard. The vineyard was miles away, but I swear I saw rows of vines stretching into the night beyond our house. The next morning, my mother insisted we see a priest. The priest listened patiently, but I could tell he didn't believe. He sprinkled holy water on me, muttered prayers, and told my parents to have faith. It did nothing. That night, I woke with soil under my fingernails. I had no memory of leaving. My bed, the haunting, the possession, if that's what it was, grew stronger. I wasn't myself anymore. My handwriting changed. I signed school papers with the name Jacobus. I refused to eat unless it was maize porridge, the food I remembered from another life. I told my father he owed me money. He slapped me, out of fear more than anger. But the sting on my cheek didn't belong to me. It belonged to Jacobus. One evening, I overheard my parents arguing. My father wanted to send me away, to a doctor or even a boarding school. My mother begged him not to. She said if they abandoned me, Jacobus would never rest and I would be lost forever. They didn't. No, I was listening. That night, I made a decision. I walked back to the vineyard alone. My feet carried me straight to the crooked tree. The soil where they had dug was still disturbed, the grass refusing to grow. I knelt there and whispered, "I know you. I am you. But I can't carry this anymore." The air grew heavy, like a storm pressing down. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I thought I would suffocate. Then I heard it, faint but clear. "Deiskald is Batal. The debt is paid." I collapsed. When I woke, dawn light stretched across the sky, and my mother was shaking me, tears streaming down her face. She had followed me, fearing I'd do something reckless. But when I looked at her, for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The weight was gone. The body was buried properly, with prayers and a marker that bore the name Jacobus. The workers who had once muttered about bad luck came to lay flowers. Something shifted in that vineyard after the burial. The vines grew thick, the grapes abundant. People whispered it was as if the land itself had been unburdened. I never spoke Afrikaans fluently again. The words slipped away like smoke. The dreams stopped. I was just a boy again, or at least that's what everyone told themselves. But sometimes when I walk through vineyards, even now, decades later, I feel him beside me. Not angry, not restless, just there, watching through my eyes, reminding me that debts can haunt the living until they're repaid. And you know what the strangest part is? When I drink red wine, I swear I can taste soil. Not the soil of the bottle's origin, but that one patch of earth in Stellenbosch, where a boy dug up his own bones and finally gave himself peace. Story number 4. When I tell you this, I need you to believe me, because if I keep carrying it alone, I'll go insane. I was 22 when it started, in 2009, working night shifts at a shipping yard in Murmansk. Nothing glamorous, just freezing. Docks, diesel stink, endless crates. My head was foggy from exhaustion most nights. But one evening I remember clearer than anything else in my life. It was 2 in the morning, snow still falling sideways off the water, and I suddenly felt this bone-deep cold that wasn't normal. I was used to Murmansk cold. This was different. It was the kind that bites inside your chest, like your lungs are frosting over. I dropped the wrench I was holding and bent over, coughing. I thought I was sick, but when I looked up, I wasn't seeing the dock anymore. Not exactly. I swear to you, I saw trenches half buried in snow and men slumped against each other like broken dolls. Their eyes glazed, mouths open, rifles frozen in their grip. I blinked and the dock was back. Crates stacked high, a forklift buzzing in the distance. Nobody noticed me. I kept shaking my head, muttering to myself, trying to force it away. For weeks I said nothing. But at night, when I lay down in my apartment, the same images came back. Sometimes dreams, sometimes while I was wide awake. I'd be brushing my teeth and suddenly I could hear boots crunching in snow. Orders shouted in clipped Russian, artillery echoing far off. Once, I looked in the mirror and for a split second my reflection wasn't mine. It was a man in a ragged uniform, face blistered from frostbite, blood caked at the corner of his mouth. I started talking to myself, quietly at first. "Stop it. Stop." I'd shake my head, splash water on my face. But then the memories, if I can even call them, that became more detailed. I knew names: Petrov, Ivanov, Sokolov. I knew the weight of a Mosin Nagant rifle in my arms even though I'd never touched one in my life. I could tell you how the bolt stuck when snow iced over it. I could taste frozen bread crust in my mouth, and I felt this overwhelming sorrow, like a weight pressing on me every second. because in those moments, I wasn't Ishfaq anymore. I was someone else. I told a friend at work, just to get it off my chest. Sasha, older guy, tough, cynical. He laughed, said, "You're just tired. Too much vodka." But later, when he saw how pale I looked, he said, "If you're serious, go to the archives. People died everywhere here during the war. Maybe you're just reading about it in your sleep without knowing." I thought he was mocking me, but the idea stuck. On a Saturday, I walked to the city archives, a dull building with peeling paint. Inside, it smelled like dust and damp paper. I told the woman at the desk I was researching family history. She barely looked up. She pointed me to a microfilm reader. I didn't even know what I was searching for until the words fell out of my mouth. 83rd Rifle Division. I don't know where it came from. I found it, page after page of faded reports. The 83rd fought in the north, near Murmansk, holding off German advances in 1942. I read casualty reports, freezing deaths, ambushes, and then I saw names of the fallen, scrawled in Cyrillic. My heart stopped when I saw Mikhail Ivanovich Sokolov. That name had been in my head for weeks, like a splinter. My hands shook so badly the reel rattled in the machine. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept whispering his name over and over, Mikhail Sokolov. And then I started crying. Real tears, but they didn't feel like mine. They were someone else's grief pouring through me. I saw flashes of him marching, laughing with comrades, and then lying half buried in snow, lungs frozen, eyes staring at the sky. I tried to push it away. I forced myself into routine work, eat, sleep. But my co-workers noticed. They said I looked gaunt, hollow-eyed. Sasha cornered me one night and asked, "What did you find?" I told him, quietly, about Mikhail. He didn't laugh this time. He just said, "Don't dig too deep. The dead don't like to be disturbed." But I couldn't stop. Every time I tried to resist, something pulled me back. I went to the military cemetery on the outskirts of town. Rows of crosses in the snow, many with no names. I stood there for hours, shivering, waiting for I don't know what. And then I felt it a pull to one particular grave. Unmarked, the wood cracked and leaning. My chest ached so sharply I dropped to my knees. I dug in the snow with bare hands until my nails split. I didn't find anything but frozen earth. But I knew, without question, that Mikhail was there. I began hearing whispers at night, not loud, just faint murmurs like soldiers talking in the dark. Sometimes laughter, sometimes groans of pain. I'd wake with frost on my breath even though the heat was blasting. I'd stumble to the kitchen, shaking, and hear boots pacing behind me. When I turned, no one was there. One night, half asleep, I spoke out loud, "Why me?" And clear as anything, a voice answered in Russian. "Because you remember?" I froze. I swear to you I heard it. I wasn't dreaming. The words were inside my room. I pressed my back to the wall, heart racing, whispering, "What do you want?" No answer, just the sound of wind, though the window was closed tight. The next day I went back to the archives. I wanted proof that this wasn't madness. I dug deeper into records of the 83rd. I found a detailed account of a retreat. January 1942. A regiment cut off, many froze to death. Among the listed dead, Sokolov, Mikhail Ivanovich. My head spun. It was like reading my own obituary. I copied the record, took it home, stared at it for hours. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I thought, maybe if I burn this, it'll end. So I lit a match, held it to the paper. But instead of relief, I felt this crushing guilt, like betraying myself. I dropped the burning scrap in the sink and sobbed. The more I fought it, the more violent it became. I'd wake with bruises on my arms, shaped like fingers gripping me. My legs ached with cold burns. Once, I woke choking, my throat so tight I thought I'd die. When I looked in the mirror, my lips were blue, frost clinging to my hair. I stopped going to work. My boss called, then stopped. I didn't care. I stayed in my apartment, curtains drawn, drinking to keep the visions away. But alcohol only made it worse. The trenches appeared sharper, the cries louder. One night I felt bodies pressing against me in bed, dozens of them, their frozen skin scraping mine. I screamed until my throat tore. But when I turned on the lights, I was alone. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just let it consume me. I thought maybe if I found his family, gave him peace, it would end. I searched records for Sokolov's relatives. I found a line about his wife, Galina, in Arkhangelsk. Maybe she had descendants. I traveled. There, desperate, half delirious, I knocked on doors, asked old people if they knew the Sokolov name. Most shook their heads. One woman, ancient, hunched, nodded slowly. "Sokolov," she whispered. "My cousin. He never came home." I showed her the copy of the record. She cried softly. She said Galina had died childless, alone, no one left. I felt this crushing despair, not just mine, but Mikhail's. His whole line ended, erased by snow and silence. When I left her house, I collapsed on the street, sobbing. For hours, I lay there, feeling half dead myself. That night, back in my hotel, I whispered, "I'm sorry," and for the first time, the whispers in my head quieted, not gone, but softer. I returned to Murmansk. I went back to that unmarked grave. I knelt, lit a candle, pressed my forehead to the wood. "Rest now," I said. "You're not forgotten." The wind died, and for a moment the world was so still I thought my heart had stopped. Then warmth spread through me, brief but real, like sunlight piercing clouds. The visions haven't fully left. Some nights I still hear boots in the snow, still wake tasting blood in my mouth. But it's lighter now, not crushing. Sometimes I even smile when I hear the faint laughter of men in the dark. I think maybe, just maybe, he found peace through me, or maybe I am him, trying to forgive myself for dying cold and alone. I know how this sounds, but I can't deny it. I lived two lives, one in the present, one in the frozen trenches of 1942. And sometimes, when I walk by the sea in Murmansk and the wind cuts so sharp, it feels like knives. I whisper his name under my breath, Mikhail Sokolov. Because if I don't, I fear he'll come back. And this time, he won't let go. Story number 5. I was 6 years old the first time it happened. We were in Bergen, visiting my aunt, and she had taken us into this little cafe that smelled like cinnamon and warm bread. I remember walking in, holding my mother's hand when the scent of baked goods hit me. It wasn't pleasant. It was suffocating. It was thick, heavy, like smoke trapped in my throat. I froze, my chest tightened, my vision blurred, and before I knew it, I was screaming, not crying like a normal child would, not whining because I was tired or cranky, screaming, full lungs, as though I were burning alive. I clutched at my throat, clawed at my dress, and shrieked, "It's on fire! Get out! Get out!" Everyone turned and stared, embarrassed for my mother, who bent down and hissed, stop it right now." But I couldn't stop. The heat was real to me, even though the cafe was calm. People sipping coffee and eating pastries like nothing was wrong. My aunt dragged us out into the street, and once the fresh air hit me, I collapsed into sobs. I couldn't explain it. All I said was, "It was burning." My mother muttered something about me being overtired, but that wasn't it. I knew the difference. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a memory. That night, I dreamed of flames. I dreamed of a bakery I had never seen before, with soot on the windows and sacks of flour stacked against the walls. I saw myself inside, but I wasn't me. I was another girl, smaller, thinner, with long hair tied back under a scarf. I was sweeping the floor, and then the oven burst. The flames licked across the walls, and my chest filled with smoke. I woke up gagging. My mother brushed it off, told me children have nightmares, but the dreams didn't stop. Every time I smelled baking bread, I felt it again, the heat, the terror, the lungs collapsing. And I started to say things I shouldn't have known. I told my aunt about the bakery on Strandgaten, a street name I couldn't possibly have known at that age. I told her about the man who locked the door because he thought the smoke would stop. My mother slapped me across the face for saying that in front of her, but I saw the look my aunt gave her. She looked unsettled. She believed me. The older I got, the more the memories sharpened. I stopped screaming in public, but the fear never left me. At 12, I was walking home from school when I passed a bakery near Briggen. I froze mid-step because I knew, down to the last tile, what the inside looked like, even though I had never been there. I whispered under my breath, there's a trapdoor in the back room. Under the flour sacks, my friend laughed, thought I was making it up, but the baker, who overheard, went pale. He asked, "How did you know that?" I just ran. It became impossible to ignore. At 14, I begged my aunt to take me to the local archives. She worked at the library, so she had access. We pulled out old newspapers, yellowed and brittle, and I combed through them with a strange urgency, like my hands were moving on their own. And then I found it. An article from 1911. Bakery fire claims young apprentice. The words made my stomach twist. I read the entire column in one breath. A small bakery had gone up in flames. The owner escaped with burns, but a girl unidentified had perished inside. The article mentioned her age, 12, my age then. I didn't tell my mother. She'd have called me crazy. But my aunt sat in silence, her face pale as chalk. Maybe it's just coincidence, she whispered, though she didn't sound convinced. By 16, the dreams became unbearable. They didn't just come at night. I'd smell fire in empty rooms, taste ash on my tongue when there was nothing burning. I'd hear the sound of wood cracking, walls collapsing. I knew what it meant. I wasn't just remembering, I was reliving. I thought I could push it away, but the past kept pressing closer. At 19, I got a part-time job in a cafe, trying to prove to myself I wasn't afraid anymore. The first day I walked into the kitchen, the oven's roaring. I nearly fainted. My boss laughed, said I wasn't used to the heat. But I knew better. That night, I dreamed again, only this time I didn't wake up at the moment of death. I stayed with it. I felt the skin on my arms blister, my hair catching fire, the choking black filling my lungs. I felt myself crumple to the floor, screaming for help, and no one came. I woke up shaking, my sheets soaked with sweat. I wanted to quit, but something inside me told me not to. Something wanted me to keep going. That something grew louder in my 20s. I stopped fearing the memories and started chasing them. I wanted to know who I had been, why I was still here. I dug deeper. Old records, census lists, property registries, and the first found her. Her name was Anna Christofferson. She had been an orphan taken in by the baker, more servant than apprentice. She died in 1911. They never found her family. She was buried in an unmarked grave. Reading her name did something to me. It was like my body recognized it before my mind did. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and I whispered, "That was me." I knew it with absolute certainty. But it wasn't just about knowing. Something darker was waiting beneath it all, and I didn't realize it until I started visiting the old bakery site. It's not a bakery anymore, just a clothing shop, but the foundation is the same. I'd stand outside, staring at the bricks, and I'd hear crying, not faint, not imagined, actual sobs echoing from inside. Once, late at night, I pressed my hand to the wall and felt heat searing through the stone. I yanked it back, but my palm was red, like I'd touched fire. I should have stopped, but obsession is stronger than fear. I went back again and again, until one night, the owner of the shop confronted me. He was an older man, kind, curious. I confessed everything about the dreams, the fire, Anna. He didn't laugh. He told me he'd sometimes smelled smoke himself, though there was never a source. He said workers refused to stay late because they heard footsteps and whispers. Then he asked the question that had been clawing at the back of my mind. What if she's still there? That night, I dreamed of her again, only this time, she looked at me. She turned her face toward me, blackened with soot, eyes wide with terror, and whispered, "Why did you leave me?" I woke screaming, my throat raw. I didn't know what she meant. I hadn't left her. I was her. Unless there was more to it than I'd realized. Unless I hadn't died alone. I couldn't rest until I found out. I went back to the archives, this time looking not for Anna, but for the baker. His name was Henrik Olsen. He survived, though badly burned. The article had said he tried to rescue the girl, but was overcome by smoke. But later records painted a different picture. A lawsuit. Testimonies. He had locked the door that night to keep thieves out, even after the fire started. He saved himself. He left me to die. The betrayal was like a blade in my gut. All these years, the memory had been incomplete, and now I knew why. The final piece had been buried in silence, but Anna had remembered. I had remembered, and she wanted justice. After that, everything spiraled. I stopped sleeping, because every time I closed my eyes, she was there, her blistered hands reaching for me, her voice hissing. Don't forget. I began hearing crackling flames even while awake. Once, in my apartment, the stove turned on by itself. Another time, my curtains smoldered though no flame touched them. Friends told me I looked sick, hollow, but I couldn't stop. I was consumed by the need to set her free. It came to a head on the anniversary of the fire, March 3rd. I stood outside the old shop, clutching a single matchbox. I don't even know if I meant to use it. I only knew I had to be there. As midnight approached, the air grew thick, choking. I smelled smoke pouring from the cracks of the building, though no one else in the street reacted. I heard her crying again, louder than ever. My vision swam, heat blasting my face, and I saw flames rising inside the shop, just as they had in 1911. Only this time, the door swung open. I don't know what compelled me, but I stepped inside. The shop dissolved into blackened beams and smoldering walls. I was back in the bakery. The oven roared, flour floated like ash, and Anna stood before me, her small frame trembling. She looked at me with eyes too old for her face and whispered, "Now you see." I tried to reach her, but she shook her head. "You are me, but I am still here. Finish it." Then she pointed to the back, to the trapdoor. I stumbled over, heart pounding, and pulled it open. Beneath was darkness, the stench of rot. And then I saw them, bones, charred and small, curled like she had died clutching herself. My breath caught. She hadn't been buried at all. She was still here, hidden, forgotten under the floorboards for decades. I fell to my knees and sobbed. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I remember now. I won't leave you again." And then the fire went out. Just like that, the heat, the smoke, the sound, it all vanished. I was in the modern shop again. Fluorescent lights buzzing, clothes hanging neatly, but the trapdoor was gone. My hands were empty. Only the echo of her cry remained in my ears. I told no one for years. Who would believe me? But I changed. I stopped fearing ovens, stopped waking in the night choking on smoke. The dreams ended. It was like she had finally let go, like she had needed me to find her, to see her bones, to acknowledge her death. I've carried this secret ever since. Sometimes when I pass a bakery, I still feel a twinge of heat in my chest, a reminder of who I was. But it doesn't control me anymore. It's not horror now, it's memory. And memory, once faced, loses its power to burn. Story number 6. I woke up gasping, my hands clenching the sheets so tightly my knuckles ached. The dream was the same as always, cobblestones slick with rain. A narrow alley that seemed to close in the farther I walked, the smell of rotting fish, mixed with oil lamps, and then the blade. A flash of silver across my throat, the warmth spilling down my chest, and my body collapsing into a puddle that swallowed me whole. I always woke up just before the last breath left me, but the sensation lingered, as though my body had really been cut. My neck stung with phantom pain, and sometimes I swore I saw faint lines when I looked in the mirror. For weeks I told myself it was stress, maybe the result of overworking, maybe the leftover residue of bad movies or novels. But dreams don't smell like that. Dreams don't leave you with the taste of blood at the back of your throat when you wake up. And the strangest part, each time I dreamed it, I noticed more detail. A red lantern swaying above a shop door, a torn sandal strap, even a carved wooden sign that I could almost read before the blade caught me. One evening, I confided in my friend Emmy over drinks. I laughed nervously, trying to make it sound lighter than it was, but she stared at me in silence. "You've described that place 3 times now," she said. "That alley exists. I've walked past it in Fukuoka. The fish market is still nearby." The words landed on me like a stone. I brushed it off with forced humor, but inside I knew she was right. I could see it as clearly as if I'd been there yesterday, and I hadn't. Not in this life, at least. The next Saturday, against all sense, I went. I told myself it was just curiosity, a way to prove it was coincidence. The streets of Fukuoka were alive with chatter and movement, but when I turned down the smaller roads near the old market, The noise seemed to peel away, my pulse quickened. I recognized the slope of the stones before I even saw the alley. The sign was different now, newer wood, but the angle of the walls matched perfectly. My legs shook as I stepped into it, breath shallow. The smell hit me, not the fresh catch of the day like outside the market, but the rank, sour scent I knew from my dreams. My throat closed and I almost turned back, but something deeper than fear pulled me forward. Halfway in, I froze. I had been here, not as myself, not in this body, but I had walked this exact path. I closed my eyes, and the world bent. The modern hum of scooters and chatter faded, replaced by the clip of wooden sandals, the hiss of oil lamps, the hush of rain against wooden eaves. My heart beat into rhythms, my own and someone else's. When I opened my eyes again, the alley looked the same, but older. My hands trembled. I reached for the wall, but instead of smooth concrete, I felt rough wooden beams. And then I heard him, a voice low and ragged, whispering words I didn't understand, but knew were meant for me. I turned and saw only the alley stretching behind me, but the air thickened, pressing in. My skin prickled. I stumbled forward, desperate to escape. But my sandal, no, my shoe caught on something. A rock, a memory. I couldn't tell. I fell to my knees, and in that instant, it was happening again. The blade flashed. A figure stepped from the darkness, faceless but solid. The steel kissed my throat, and pain seared as real as the first time. I screamed and jerked back, landing hard on the wet stones of the modern alley. The figure was gone, but my neck throbbed as if it had been cut open. I ran. I didn't care who saw me. I didn't stop until I was blocks away, heaving, tears running hot. People stared, but I couldn't form words. I pressed my neck, half expecting blood, but my skin was unbroken. Only the phantom sting remained. That night I couldn't sleep. My body shook with exhaustion, but every time I drifted, I felt the blade again. Finally, desperate, I searched online for old Fukuoka crime records. Hours passed, nothing but scattered notes, until one line caught my eye. Edo period merchant stabbed in Market Alley, unsolved, 1823. My heart stopped. The description was too close. A woman, traveling alone, carrying goods, throat slit. No arrest ever made. I stared at the words until my vision blurred. It wasn't just a dream. I had lived that. Somehow, I had lived that. Days blurred after that. At work, I was distracted, waiting for the sting on my throat. In crowds, I flinched if anyone walked too close. I started hearing footsteps behind me at night, even on empty streets. Once, walking home, I caught a reflection in a window that wasn't mine. A woman in plain robes, hair tied back, eyes wide with terror. I blinked and it was gone, but my body shook for hours after. Emmy grew worried. She begged me to stop going near that alley, but the pull was unbearable. I needed to know why. So I went back, one last time, just before dusk. The streets were quieter. The alley waited. My hands shook, but I forced myself inside. I whispered into the emptiness, "What do you want from me?" For a moment, nothing. Then the air grew colder, heavy. A sound like cloth dragging echoed. My chest tightened. I felt him again, the faceless man, closer than before. My throat burned. Panic surged, but I clenched my fists. "I know what you did," I whispered. "You killed me." The silence cracked. A rush of heat coursed down my arms, and a flood of memories burst, bargaining with vendors, carrying fabric bundles, turning into this alley one rainy night, hearing footsteps, spinning too late. His face flashed clear for the first time, narrow, hungry eyes, a twisted grin, the smell of sake on his breath. He didn't want money. He wanted power, control. My last breath had been filled with the taste of his hand pressing me down. The vision ended as violently as it began, and I collapsed against the wall, sobbing. My throat was untouched, but my chest ached with grief that wasn't new. It was old, centuries old, but it was mine. And then, a voice, clear, feminine, inside. "Me, but not me. You remember now. That is enough." The weight lifted. The air loosened. I sat there shaking, tears streaming, but the dread was gone. The faceless man was nowhere. For the first time, the alley was just an alley. When I finally stumbled out, the Streets of Fukuoka looked normal, people bustling, voices chattering. The world hadn't changed, but I had. That night I slept without dreams. My neck didn't sting. The phantom footsteps never came again. I carried the knowledge quietly who I had been, how I had died, and how I had survived long enough to remember I never went back to that alley. I didn't need to. But even now, when I pass through narrow streets, I catch myself touching my throat, just to be sure. Not out of fear anymore, but out of respect for the life I once lived and the death I'll never forget. Story number 7. I'll never forget the first time it happened. I was sitting in my kitchen in Plzek, drinking tea, not thinking about anything in particular when the sound came. It wasn't from the room, not from outside either. It was inside. My head, sharp and sudden, like branches snapping under a heavy foot. My hands froze around the cup. For a few seconds I couldn't breathe because I could feel the forest floor beneath me, damp and thick with leaves, and I could smell wood smoke as if someone had just put out a fire nearby. I remember whispering aloud what the hell was that. The tea tasted of ashes when I swallowed again. That was in the spring of 1987, and I've carried the weight of those visions ever since. At first I thought I was dreaming while awake, or maybe that I was simply overtired. But the flashes came back, sharper each time. It wasn't like imagination. I knew things that I shouldn't have known, and they came in pieces, rough hands, pulling at my arms, rope biting into my wrists, faces blurred but angry, screaming at me in Czech words I didn't even understand fully, though I'm Czech myself. Old words, outdated, accents that didn't fit modern voices. The strangest part was that my body reacted before my brain caught up. I would be walking near a patch of trees and suddenly my chest would tighten, as if I were about to run. I'd catch myself glancing toward the ground, expecting to see traps hidden there, wire snares or pits. Once, I had such a vivid flash that I fell to my knees in the dirt, gasping, clutching my forearms like I was still bound. A man passing by shouted if I was all right. I lied and told him I had vertigo, but deep down I knew something else was happening, something I couldn't explain away. One night, after another sleepless evening filled with fragmented dreams of bloodied fur and snarling dogs, I confided in my friend Petra. We sat in her apartment, and I told her everything in a rush, like if I didn't say it quickly it might choke me. "I think I've lived this before," I said. "I think I died in the forest." Petra looked at me with wide eyes, but she didn't laugh. She just asked me to explain. So I told her about the ropes, the shouting, the blows raining down on me. I told her how I could feel my body as though it wasn't mine, broader shoulders, rougher hands, and a desperate hunger that wasn't only for food, but for something like freedom. Petra said, softly, "You should write it down, every detail. Maybe it's, I don't know, a past life." She half smiled when she said it, as though she expected me to dismiss the idea. But I didn't dismiss it. It was the first suggestion that didn't feel insane. I started writing everything that came to me. In the mornings, sometimes I woke with sentences already in my mind, not my voice but another's. Coarse and angry, "They'll never take me without a fight." Other times, a vision of blood dripping onto snow, or the sound of a branch creaking just before it snapped. I filled pages until my hand ached. The more I wrote, the more detail I remembered. There were names whispered: Yannick, Tomas. There was an image of myself, but not the me I knew. A man, hair shaggy, eyes hollow with hunger, clutching a bough. But then, sometimes I wasn't a man at all. My memories shifted, like sliding into another skin. A woman's voice, firm, calling out in protest when the villagers dragged me through the clearing. My body, my identity fluid, shifting, but always me, always the one they tied down. One particular vision nearly broke me. I was in bed, sweating, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might stop. I felt the villagers tying me to a wooden post, their breath steaming in the cold night air. They accused me of stealing game deer, rabbits, anything from their traps. I shouted back, swearing I took nothing that wasn't already mine, that I only hunted to survive. They didn't listen. They called me an abomination, not just for stealing, but for being unnatural, for being neither man nor woman as they understood it. The memory seared into me like a brand. I woke with my wrists aching, red marks circling them like fresh wounds. By then Petra was the only one I trusted to tell. She insisted we try to verify some of it. If this is real, maybe. There are records, she said. So we went to the regional archives. At first the old clerks waved us away, but Petra had charm and persistence. And soon enough we were paging through brittle manuscripts that smelled of dust and mildew. Most of it was unreadable to me, but Petra traced her finger along one page and whispered, "Here, a trial, 17th century, someone accused of poaching." My stomach dropped. The record described a nameless figure, referred to only as the transgressor. The punishment was torture and death by strangling. My breath came shallow as Petra read the words aloud. The language matched the voices I'd heard in my visions. I wanted to run, to leave the room, but I couldn't move. It was like I'd found myself staring into a mirror for centuries old. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the outskirts of Plzek, drawn toward the trees without realizing it. The city noise fell away behind me until only the rustle of leaves remained. My feet carried me deeper, step after step, though I didn't know where I was going. Then, all at once, I knew. I knew exactly where I was headed. I came to a clearing I'd never seen before. My chest tightened, my knees shook. I could see, overlaid on the present, another scene, torches, shouting. The rough post in the ground. My throat clenched with the memory of rope tightening around it. Tears streamed down my face without me willing them. I whispered, "This is it. This is where I died." Petra didn't believe me at first when I told her the next day, but she agreed to come. We returned with shovels, not even sure why. It felt absurd, digging into the earth just because of my nightmares. But when the blade struck something solid, I knew. Together we scraped away soil until bone emerged thin, brittle, but unmistakably human. My whole body went cold. I touched my wrists instinctively, as if expecting the ropes again. Petra dropped her shovel, whispering a prayer under her breath. We called the authorities. They came, skeptical, but when the bones were studied, the experts confirmed what I already knew. The wrists bore deep grooves, marks consistent with ligatures, likely rope. The skeleton was incomplete, but enough remained to show signs of trauma. The bones were dated roughly to the 1600s. The archaeologists were thrilled, but I felt hollow. It wasn't discovery to me. It was remembrance. For weeks after, I couldn't stop thinking about that body in the ground. Was it me? Was it just someone else whose pain I carried for reasons I'll never know? Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the villagers' anger again. Their hatred of me not just for stealing food, but for existing outside their narrow rules. I remembered the moment of death, the searing panic, the desperate struggle, the silence that followed when the world went dark. And then, centuries later, waking up in a different skin, still carrying their cruelty with me. I told Petra that sometimes I wondered if I'd been born again only to tell the story, to make sure it wasn't forgotten. She said maybe that was true. She said maybe the forest wanted me to remember so the bones could finally be seen, not hidden forever in dirt. That thought gave me some peace. One evening, months later, I went back to the clearing alone. The archaeologists had taken what they found, leaving only disturbed earth behind. I knelt there, pressed my palms into the soil, and whispered, "I remember. I won't forget." My chest felt lighter, as if some of the weight had finally shifted. I can't explain why this happened to me, why I was chosen to remember a death for centuries past, but I know it was real. The scars on those bones match the scars I feel on my own skin. The memories aren't dreams, they're mine, and though it terrifies me, there's a strange kind of strength in it too. I lived, I died, and I live again, even now, when I walk through the forests around Plzek. I feel the echo of that life in my blood. Sometimes it's just a faint whisper, the crunch of leaves that makes me turn my head, the smell of smoke when there is no fire. Other times it's sharp, vivid, a sudden reminder of rope and shouting. But it no longer feels like punishment. It feels like testimony, proof that cruelty can't bury truth forever. And when people ask me why I believe in reincarnation, why I speak with such certainty about lives we don't remember, I tell them this: I don't believe. I know, because I've felt the rope on My wrists, centuries too late to be explained, and I've stood over my own bones. That's not belief. That's memory. Story number 8. I had never planned on telling anyone this, not in full anyway. But I suppose if I don't, it'll sit in me like poison. I was 34 at the time, living in Galway, and working as a lecturer at the university. To everyone else, I looked like an ordinary man with ordinary habits. What they didn't know was that for months I'd been waking up in the middle of the night choking, clutching at my throat, convinced I was being poisoned. The taste in my mouth was bitter, metallic, like copper shavings. Sometimes I'd vomit. Bile that burned so fiercely it felt like acid. Doctors couldn't find anything wrong with me, and the word psychosomatic got tossed around so often it clung to me like an accusation. But I knew it wasn't just in my head. It felt older than me, deeper, like I was living someone else's death. It started with the dreams. I'd see myself standing in a dim, smoky room, wooden tables slick with ale, the air rank with sweat, and sour bread. Always the same face in the mirror, behind the counter, red cheeks, rough beard. A man in his 40s with eyes like my own, but not my own. In the dream, he'd be drinking from a mug, smiling at someone I couldn't see, and then suddenly coughing, retching, clutching his chest. He'd stagger into the corner, knocking over stools, gasping for help that never came. His lips would turn blue, his body collapsing onto the sticky floor. And then I'd wake up with my own throat burning as if I'd swallowed the poison myself. At first, I told no one. I wrote it off as stress. But the episodes got worse. I'd smell stale beer in my kitchen, though I don't drink. Once, I found myself humming a tune I didn't know, an old Irish drinking song. When I looked it up, it was documented as popular in taverns around Galway in the late 1700s. I had no explanation for how I knew it. It was like memory bleeding through skin that wasn't mine. One evening, after a particularly violent episode, I told my friend Niall about it over coffee. I remember gripping the mug tightly and saying, "It's not just dreams. It's like I'm reliving someone else's last night." He laughed at first, until he saw I wasn't joking. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice like someone eavesdropping. On his own words, "You ever think you're remembering a past life? My gran used to talk about that kind of thing." I shook my head, but the suggestion lodged in me. It didn't feel absurd. It felt frighteningly close to the truth. Over the next weeks, I found myself wandering the city with no direction, as if my feet were pulling me somewhere. One Saturday, without planning it, I walked through the Latin Quarter and stopped dead, in front of a boarded-up cellar door tucked between two shops. My stomach clenched hard, the bitter taste flooding my mouth. My pulse went wild. I knew this place, though I had never seen it before. The image of that smoky tavern from my dreams pressed against the back of my eyes. My hands shook as I reached out and touched the wood. It was rough, splintered, but it felt alive, like skin stretched over bone. I pulled back quickly, glancing around to see if anyone noticed. The street was busy, but no one paid attention to me. For the first time, I whispered out loud, "This is it. This is where he died." I went back the next day, then again the day after, always lingering like a fool in front of that cellar door. Niall came with me once and frowned. "It's just an old storage cellar. You're chasing shadows." But when I insisted I needed to see what was inside, he reluctantly agreed to help. Through a contact at the university, we managed to get permission to examine it under the guise of historical interest. The property owner didn't care, as long as we didn't damage anything. That was all the invitation I needed. The day we got inside, I'll never forget the heaviness in the air. It was damp, musky, and the stone steps leading down creaked under our feet. My torch beam cut across the walls, catching on carved initials and long-faded chalk marks. The ceiling was low, the air tight, and I felt like I was descending into a throat ready to swallow me whole. At the bottom, the space opened into a broad cellar with broken barrels stacked in one corner. The floor was slick with moisture, and I could smell something stale, ale, mildew, and beneath it, faintly, something chemical, sharp like bitter almonds. My knees buckled. I knew that smell. Not in this life, but in the one that bled through. Poison. Niall kept his voice casual, but I could hear the unease. "See, just a room. nothing special. But I wasn't listening. My body moved on its own. I walked straight to the far wall, pressed my hand against the stone, and whispered. It happened here. My chest constricted, breath ragged. In a rush, I saw it unfold again, the tavern keeper, the laughter, the drink raised, the sudden coughing. His hand clutched this very wall as he went down, and I, standing in his skin, felt the collapse again, the helpless slide into black. Tears pricked my eyes, and I couldn't stop shaking. Jesus, you're white as a sheet, Niall muttered. He tried to pull me toward the stairs, but I pushed him off. I needed proof, something tangible. On instinct, I scraped at the corner of the floor with a loose stone. The dirt shifted easily, as though it had been disturbed before. My pulse hammered. I dug harder, my nails breaking, until Niall swore and joined in half-heartedly. Within minutes, we uncovered what looked like fragments of old pottery, then something harder bone. My breath caught. A rib, small and brittle, but unmistakably human. We stared at it, silent. I whispered, I told you. My voice cracked. That discovery got the attention of the local heritage office. Excavations followed, and more bones were found, scattered, broken, buried without care. Alongside them, shards of mugs and rusted utensils. The records confirmed what I already knew. There had been a tavern here in the 1700s, run by a man named Eamon Flaherty. The ledger entries ended abruptly in 1783, with rumors in parish records of his sudden, suspicious death. Some whispered poisoning, but nothing had been proven. Until now, the researchers were fascinated. They called it an incredible historical find. They marveled at my intuition in locating it. I smiled and nodded, but inside, I was unraveling. Because the closer they got to the truth, the worse the dreams became. It wasn't just the poisoning anymore. I'd see faces now, blurred figures around a table, their laughter sharp as knives. I'd hear my own voice pleading, help me, as the poison tightened its grip. And always, just before waking, I'd see a hand slipping powder into a cup, but the face of the poisoner remained just out of sight. One night, after yet another choking fit, I jolted awake with a realization that froze me. The voice in the dream begging for help, it wasn't just his voice, it was mine. And the face of the man collapsing onto the tavern floor, it wasn't just Eamon's, it was mine. I wasn't just remembering his death, I was carrying it, living it again. And the killer's face, the one that stayed hidden somehow, I knew deep down. It would never reveal itself because it wasn't about justice. It was about the endless replaying of betrayal, a cycle that didn't care about closure. I tried to step back, to distance myself, but the city wouldn't let me. Every time I walked by that cellar, I felt the pull like a tide dragging me under. Sometimes I thought I saw me standing there in the reflection of a window, raising a mug, smiling. Seconds before the poison took hold, I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. My body wasted, my mind frayed. Now begged me to see a doctor again, but I laughed bitterly. What could medicine do against death to centuries old? The end came quietly, though not how I expected. I was walking home late one evening, crossing a narrow lane not far from the tavern site, when I felt it again, that bitter taste, that tightening in my chest. My vision swam, and I staggered against a wall. But this time, instead of fighting it, I let it come. I let myself fall back into the memory, the cellar, the mug raised, the laughter, the burn in the throat. I collapsed onto the cobblestones, clutching at my chest. I must have looked like a drunk to passers-by, but to me, it was the moment of release. I felt his death in full, the convulsions, the darkness, the betrayal, and for the first time, I didn't wake choking. I just let go. When I came to, hours later in a hospital bed, something was different. The bitterness was gone. The dreams stopped. The cellar, the tavern, the poison, they all felt distant, like a story I'd read once, but couldn't quite remember. The researchers continued their work, publishing papers, debating causes, but I no longer cared. Whatever cycle I'd been trapped in had broken that night. I died with him, and in dying, I'd finally lived again. I'm telling you this now, not to convince you, but because I need someone to know it happened. That cellar is still there, boarded up again, the bones cataloged and forgotten in some archive. People pass by every day, never knowing the floor beneath them holds the echo of a man's poisoned breath. But I know I carried it, and though I'm free of it now, I can still taste it if I think too hard, the bitterness, the betrayal, and maybe, if I'm honest, a part of me will never truly escape it.